Chapter 5. The Hunt Begins. The safe house Damon led us to was nothing like his comfortable cabin. Hidden deep in a ravine where 3 mountain streams converged, it was carved directly into the living rock, ancient, defensible, and humming with protective wards that made my newly awakened senses tingle. "How long have you had this place?" I asked as we descended stone steps that seemed to meld seamlessly with the natural cliff face. "Since the night my family died." Damon's voice was carefully neutral, but I caught the undercurrent of old pain. "I've spent 20 years preparing for war, Lyra. This is just one of many contingencies." Director Frost's operatives had vanished during our trek through the mountains, disappearing into the shadows with the kind of professional efficiency that suggested they'd never been there at all. She'd claimed they had other priorities, but I suspected the truth was simpler. They were regrouping, reassessing the situation now that Asher had demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond their previous understanding. "Cowards," Damon had muttered when the last council's shadow faded into the darkness. "Pragmatists," I'd corrected. "They'll be back when they think they can control what they're dealing with." Now, as we settled into the stone chambers that would serve as our temporary sanctuary, I found myself grateful for their absence. The events of the last few hours had left me emotionally raw, and the last thing I needed was Director Frost's calculating presence adding to the pressure. Asher seemed to approve of our new surroundings. He'd remained alert and content during the difficult journey, his silver-blue eyes tracking movements and shadows that I couldn't see. Now he sat in an improvised crib fashioned from ancient stone and soft furs, his tiny hands reaching towards symbols carved into the walls, symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light when he looked at them. "What is this place?" I asked, running my fingers over the intricate carvings. "A sanctuary," Damon said. "Built by the old bloodlines before the purges began. A place where those with dangerous gifts could hide, could learn to control what they'd awakened without fear of persecution. And now it's just you. Now it's us." He moved to a section of wall that looked identical to every other section, pressing his palm against what appeared to be solid stone. A hidden door swung open, revealing a chamber filled with weapons, supplies, and communication equipment that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. I'd been monitoring supernatural activities across the continent from here. Tracking bloodline manifestations, council movements, political shifts in major pacts. Including Black Moon. Especially Black Moon. His expression hardened. "I've watched Cain stumble through leadership for 5 years, making the same mistakes his father made. The same cruel choices, the same abuse of power. I wanted to ask more about his surveillance, about what other secrets he'd kept from me, but before I could speak, alarms began sounding throughout the sanctuary. Not mechanical alarms, something deeper, more primal. The very stones were warning us of approaching danger." Damon was at the monitoring equipment in seconds, his fingers flying over controls that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. Images flickered across multiple screens, heat signatures moving through the forest above us, coordinated search patterns, the distinctive energy signatures of enhanced wolves. "How many?" I asked, moving to peer over his shoulder. 37. His voice was grim. "Military formation, professional tracking gear. This isn't a revenge party, it's an execution squad." On the largest screen, a face I recognized came into view through what must have been a hidden camera. Cain Black Moon, alive and furious, his golden eyes blazing with righteous anger as he directed his warriors through the forest. "I thought he was dead," I breathed. "So did I." Damon's fingers were already working, pulling up more camera feeds. The attack on the mating ceremony must have been more selective than we realized. More faces appeared on the screens. Selene Ravencrest, her beautiful features twisted with malice, Beta Marcus, who had somehow survived the encounter with Asher, and a dozen other Black Moon wolves I recognized. They moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit, their enhanced senses following our trail with deadly efficiency. "How did they find us so quickly?" "Asher's power signature," Damon said grimly. "It's like a beacon to anyone with the right equipment. And Cain's clearly been upgraded since we last saw him." I could see what he meant. Cain moved differently now, with a fluid grace that spoke of artificial enhancement. His eyes glowed brighter than normal wolf gold, and when he gestured to his warriors, I caught glimpses of symbols carved into his skin, marks that pulsed with stolen power. The council enhanced him, I realized. Probably. They've been known to make temporary alliances when it serves their purposes. Damon's expression was murderous. They give him the tools to capture you and Asher, and in return they get access to whatever he learns from interrogating you. They can't have him. The words came out with more force than I'd intended, laced with power that made the stone walls vibrate. They can't have my son. No, Damon agreed, his silver eyes reflecting my determination. They can't. On the screens, Cain had stopped moving. His enhanced senses had clearly detected something, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the sanctuary's audio systems. I know you're watching, he called out to the forest around him. I know you can hear me, Lyra. My Omega. My mistake. The casual possessiveness in his voice made my hands clench into fists. You've made a grave error, Cain continued, his warriors spreading out around him in a defensive circle. You've embraced corruption, allowed yourself to become something unnatural and evil. But I'm prepared to be merciful. Merciful, I repeated with bitter laughter. Surrender now, bring the child, and I'll make your death quick, Cain called. Continue to resist, and I'll ensure that your suffering becomes legendary. Celine has some very creative ideas about what to do with traitors. As if summoned by her name, Celine stepped into view of the cameras. She was even more beautiful than I remembered, her dark hair gleaming like silk and her green eyes bright with anticipation. But there was something wrong with her now, something that made my newly awakened instincts recoil in revulsion. I want her head, Celine said clearly, her voice carrying the kind of childish petulance that came from never being denied anything. I want to mount it in our den, so every Omega who looks at it remembers what happens to those who try to steal what belongs to me. You'll have it, Cain promised, his tone indulgent. Along with whatever's left of the abomination she spawned. The threat against Asher sent power surging through me like liquid fire. The temperature in the sanctuary dropped 10 degrees, and frost began forming on the monitoring equipment. Damon shot me a warning look, but I was beyond caring about subtlety. They're not going to stop, I said, watching as Cain's enhanced senses picked up traces of our passage. Are they? No. Cain's pride won't allow it, and Celine sees you as a threat to her position. Damon's expression was calculating. But we don't have to fight them here. There are other options. Such as? The Shadowlands. The name sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with my emotional state. Every wolf knew the stories about the Shadowlands, the cursed forest where reality bent and twisted, where things that shouldn't exist roamed free. It was the supernatural equivalent of a nuclear wasteland, avoided by sane creatures for good reason. That's suicide. For normal wolves, yes. But you're not normal anymore, Lyra. And neither is Asher. Damon was already moving, gathering supplies with practiced efficiency. The Shadowlands respond to power, bend to the will of those strong enough to command them. With your abilities and his. We could control a cursed forest. You could rule it. The idea should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if some part of me had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. What about the things that already live there? What about them? Damon's smile was sharp as a blade. You're a moon wraith descendant, Lyra. Death magic is your birthright. The creatures in the Shadowlands will either bow to you or learn what happens to those who challenge a true apex predator. Outside, Cain's voice rose in frustration as our trail seemed to vanish into the mountain's rocky terrain. The sanctuary's concealment wards were holding, but I could see enhanced tracking equipment being deployed, magical sensors that would eventually pierce through our defenses. How long do we have? I asked. Maybe an hour before they pinpoint our location. Damon was packing weapons now, silver-edged blades and ammunition designed specifically for supernatural warfare. But if we move now, we can reach the Shadowlands before they realize where we've gone. I looked down at Asher, who was watching our conversation with those impossibly intelligent eyes. When he sensed my attention, he smiled and reached up toward me with perfect coordination. Shadows, he said clearly. Yes, shadows. The certainty in his infant voice decided me. Then we go. The journey to the Shadowlands took 3 hours of hard travel through terrain that grew progressively stranger the closer we got to our destination. The trees became gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching toward each other in ways that defied natural growth patterns. The air itself felt thick, charged with energies that made my skin tingle and my newly awakened senses go haywire. Stay close, Damon warned as we approached what looked like a wall of perpetual twilight stretching between 2 mountain peaks. The border can be disorienting for first-time visitors. He wasn't exaggerating. The moment we stepped through that wall of shadow, reality seemed to shift around us. Colors became more vivid while somehow also being more muted. Distances stretched and compressed without warning. Sounds came from directions that shouldn't exist. But instead of being overwhelmed by the strangeness, I felt something else entirely, a sense of homecoming, as if this twisted landscape was exactly where I belonged. It recognizes you, Damon said, his voice filled with wonder. The Shadowlands themselves are acknowledging your power. As if in response to his words, the path ahead of us began to straighten and clarify, leading us deeper into the cursed forest with a certainty that felt like invitation rather than chance. We walked for what felt like hours but might have been minutes, following trails that appeared just when we needed them and disappeared once we'd passed. Eventually, we emerged into a clearing that defied every law of physics I understood. The space was simultaneously vast and intimate, with trees that reached up into darkness while their roots descended into pools of starlight. In the center stood a structure that might once have been a cottage but had been transformed by the Shadowlands' influence into something altogether more magnificent, part palace, part fortress, part temple. Welcome to your new home, Damon said softly. But it was the figures emerging from the shadows around the clearing that truly captured my attention. They came from all directions, creatures that had once been wolves but had been changed by their time in this place, beings that existed on the borders between life and death, entities that should have been impossible but were undeniably real. A woman who moved like flowing water, her form shifting between solid and liquid with each step. A man whose skin was covered in symbols that wrote and rewrote themselves continuously, telling stories of power and loss in languages I somehow understood. A child who looked no older than 12 but whose eyes held the weight of centuries, whose very presence made the air around her shimmer with potential. They approached slowly, reverently, their gazes fixed on me with an intensity that should have been frightening. Instead, I felt a strange sense of recognition, as if I'd been waiting to meet these outcasts my entire life. Death Mother, the water woman said, her voice like distant thunder. We have been expecting you. Death Mother? I repeated, the title feeling foreign on my tongue. The one who commands the boundary between life and death, the symbol-covered man explained. The one prophesied to gather the forgotten and the forsaken, to build something new from the ashes of the old world. I'm not, I started to protest, but Asher made a soft sound from my arms, and suddenly the words died in my throat. Because looking at these strange, powerful beings who had somehow survived in a place where reality itself was corrupted, I realized they were exactly what I needed. Not normal wolves who would judge and fear what I was becoming, but outcasts who understood what it meant to be different, to be dangerous, to be hunted for crimes no greater than existing. How many are you? I asked instead. 43 who remain, the ancient child said. Though others will come when word spreads that the Death Mother has finally arrived. Others? Supernatural refugees from across the continent, Damon explained. Beings whose abilities made them too dangerous for normal society, who fled here rather than face execution or experimentation. We have been waiting, the water woman continued. Hiding, surviving, but not truly living. We need purpose, Death Mother. We need someone to follow who understands what we've sacrificed. And what do you think I can offer you? War, said a new voice from the shadows. Glorious, righteous war against those who would cage us, study us, use us as weapons in their petty conflicts. The speaker emerged into the clearing's strange light, and I had to suppress a gasp. He had once been a wolf, but something had fundamentally altered his nature. His skin was pale as moonlight, his hair white as fresh snow, and his eyes burned with silver fire that reminded me of Damon's but carried an edge of madness that was entirely his own. "Gabriel Frost," Damon said, his tone carefully neutral. "I thought you were dead." "Death is a relative concept in the Shadowlands," Gabriel replied with a smile that was beautiful and terrible. "Especially for those of us who've learned to dance on its edges." Frost. The same surname as Director Frost, I realized. Family, perhaps, or just coincidence in a world where nothing seemed coincidental anymore. "You know him?" I asked Damon. "Gabriel was one of the first refugees to reach the Shadowlands after the final purge," Damon explained. "His bloodline carried abilities that let him manipulate ice and cold at a molecular level. The Council wanted to weaponize him. So I came here instead," Gabriel said cheerfully. "Spent 20 years learning to control not just my original gifts, but the new ones the Shadowlands have taught me." His silver eyes fixed on me with uncomfortable intensity. "And waiting for someone worthy to lead us back into the world." "I'm not a leader." "Aren't you?" The ancient child stepped closer, her young face solemn. "You've awakened power that hasn't been seen for centuries. You've produced a child who can reshape reality with his will. You've survived betrayal, rejection, and hunting parties that would have destroyed lesser beings. More than that," Gabriel added, "you've maintained your humanity despite everything that's been done to you. That's the mark of a true leader, someone who can wield terrible power without being consumed by it." I wanted to argue, to insist that I was just trying to survive and protect my son. But as I looked around the clearing at the strange, powerful beings who were watching me with hope and reverence, I felt something shifting inside me. These weren't monsters, despite what the outside world might think. They were refugees, survivors, people who had been cast out for the crime of being different. They needed protection, purpose, someone who understood their struggles because she'd lived them. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "That you stop running," Gabriel said simply. "That you stop hiding what you are and embrace the power you've been given. That you build something new, not a pack based on hierarchy and submission, but a family based on choice and mutual respect. And then? Then we show the world what happens when the outcasts unite," the Water Woman said. "When those who've been deemed monsters decide to become legends instead." Asher chose that moment to make a sound, not crying, but a soft coo of contentment that somehow carried clearly across the entire clearing. When every eye turned to him, he smiled and reached out with one tiny hand toward the assembled beings. "Family," he said clearly. "Yes. Family." The words seemed to resonate through the Shadowlands themselves, carried by forces that existed beyond normal physics. And in that moment, I felt something click into place, not just acceptance of what I was becoming, but anticipation for what we could become together. "All right," I said, my voice carrying more authority than I'd known I possessed. "But we do this my way. No unnecessary killing, no random destruction. We protect each other, we help those who need help, and we show the world that being different doesn't mean being evil." "And if the world refuses to accept that lesson?" Gabriel asked. I felt my power stirring in response to the question, cold and patient and utterly implacable. Around the clearing, plants that had been struggling to grow in the Shadowlands' twisted environment suddenly flourished, as if responding to my emotional state. "Then we teach it more forcefully." The assembled beings bowed as one, their forms shifting and flowing in ways that spoke of power barely contained. Gabriel's smile widened, showing teeth that were just a little too sharp to be entirely human. "Welcome home, Death Mother," he said. "Your reign begins now." In the distance, I could hear howls, Kane's hunting party, still tracking us through the mountains. But they sounded different now, smaller somehow. Less like predators and more like prey that didn't yet understand what they were hunting. Let them come. Let them see what I'd found in the darkness, what I'd built from the ashes of my old life. The pack that had rejected me was about to learn that some things, once cast out, returned stronger than ever. And when they did, there would be consequences that echoed across the supernatural world for generations to come. The hunt was about to become something far more dangerous than Kane could have imagined. Because now, the prey was hunting back. Chapter 6. 3 weeks in the Shadowlands had changed everything. Not just the strange, impossible landscape around us, though that continued to shift and adapt to my presence in ways that defied explanation, but Asher himself. My son, who should have been barely a month old, now had the physical development of a toddler and the mental acuity of someone far, far older. It's the convergence, Gabriel explained as we watched Asher practice walking across the clearing with perfect coordination. His abilities are accelerating his physical growth to match his magical development. By next month, he'll likely appear to be 3 or 4 years old. Is that normal? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Nothing about our situation qualified as normal. For convergence children? There's no precedent, Damon said grimly. The last confirmed convergence birth was over 400 years ago, and that child didn't survive to see his second week. Encouraging, I muttered, but my attention was focused on Asher as he moved through the supernatural refugees who had claimed me as their death mother. They treated him with a reverence that bordered on worship, and he responded with the kind of casual authority that should have been impossible in someone so young. "Mama," he said, his voice now clear and articulate despite his apparent age. "I need to go see the broken pack." The words sent ice through my veins. "What do you mean?" "They're planning something foolish," he explained with the patient tone of someone addressing a particularly slow student. "The false alpha and his poisonous mate think they can hunt us with conventional tactics. They need to be educated about their limitations." "Absolutely not." I knelt to his eye level, marveling again at how much he'd grown in such a short time. "You're not going anywhere near Cain or his pack." "But Mama," Asher said with devastating logic, "how else will we know what they're planning? How else will we turn their own strategies against them?" Before I could answer, Gabriel materialized beside us in that unsettling way he had of moving through shadows. "The boy has a point, Death Mother. Intelligence gathering is crucial if we're going to stay ahead of their hunting parties." "He's a child." "Is he?" Gabriel's silver eyes studied Asher with uncomfortable intensity. "Look at him, Lyra. Really look." I followed his gaze and felt my breath catch. Asher was standing perfectly still, but the air around him was alive with possibilities, shadows that moved independently of any light source, flowers that bloomed and withered in rapid cycles, small animals that approached him with the kind of fearless devotion usually reserved for deities. "I can make them see what I want them to see," Asher said matter-of-factly. "I can appear as a lost pup, scared and harmless. They'll take me in because their pride demands it, the Great Black Moon Pack, protectors of the innocent. And if they recognize you? How could they?" His smile was beautiful and terrible. "I was newborn when they last saw me. Now I look like a completely different child, with abilities they can't even begin to comprehend. It's too dangerous." "Everything is dangerous now, Mama." Asher moved closer, his small hand finding mine. "But danger is also opportunity. Let me go to them. Let me be your eyes and ears in their territory." "The child speaks wisdom," said a new voice. Anna, the ancient-looking girl who commanded time magic, stepped into view. "The Black Moon Pack grows bolder by the day. They've recruited allies, enhanced their warriors, begun reaching out to other packs for support. Soon they'll have enough power to threaten even the Shadowlands." "What kind of allies?" Damon asked, his expression darkening. "Council operatives, primarily. But also representatives from the European Covenant and something calling itself the Order of the Silver Moon." Anna's childlike features were grim. "They're building a coalition, Death Mother. A supernatural army designed specifically to capture or kill you and Asher." The implications made my stomach clench. "How do you know this?" "Because I can see probability streams, glimpses of potential futures. And in too many of them, we're overwhelmed by sheer numbers." Anna's eyes found mine. "Unless we act first. Unless we gather intelligence and strike before they're ready." "Which brings us back to my proposal," Asher said calmly. "Let me go to them. Let me learn their secrets and plant the seeds of their destruction." "Plant seeds?" I repeated. "Cursed tokens," Gabriel explained, pulling what looked like small, intricately carved stones from his pocket. Shadowland artifacts that will allow us to spy on anyone who carries them. The boy could distribute them throughout the pack, give us constant surveillance of their activities. I examined one of the tokens, feeling the dark magic contained within its carved surface. It was subtle, almost undetectable, but it hummed with power that felt familiar, death magic, twisted and refined by the Shadowland's influence. How do they work? Blood magic, Damon said. Once activated by the carrier's life force, they create a connection we can tap into. We'll be able to see through their eyes, hear their conversations, even sense their emotional states. And the risk to Asher? Minimal, if he's careful. Gabriel's expression was sincere. The tokens will also protect him, alert us if he's in genuine danger. We can pull him out at the first sign of trouble. I wanted to refuse. Every maternal instinct I possessed screamed against sending my rapidly growing child into enemy territory, regardless of his supernatural abilities. But the rational part of my mind recognized the truth in their arguments. We needed intelligence, and Asher was uniquely positioned to gather it. One day, I said finally. You go in, distribute the tokens, and get out. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Of course, Mama. Asher's smile was angelic, but I caught the predatory satisfaction in his eyes. Just a lost little pup looking for a new home. 2 hours later, I watched my son disappear into the forest that bordered Black Moon territory, his appearance already shifting to match his cover story. Where Asher had stood, now walked a thin, frightened-looking boy with brown hair and ordinary hazel eyes, the perfect image of a refugee seeking shelter. I hate this, I muttered. You should, Damon said, moving to stand beside me. It means you're still human enough to fear for your child. That's going to be important in the days ahead. What do you mean? Power corrupts, Lyra. Especially the kind of power you're developing. The temptation to see people as pieces on a game board rather than living beings with their own hopes and fears, it's stronger than you might think. I considered his words as we made our way back to the palace-like structure that had become our headquarters. Around us, the Shadowlands pulsed with dark energy that responded to my every mood, and I could feel dozens of supernatural beings who looked to me for guidance and protection. Is that what happened to you? I asked. Is that why you were willing to manipulate me for your revenge? Partly. His admission was quiet, honest. 20 years of planning, of watching Cain destroy everything my family built, it made me forget that individual people matter more than grand strategies. And now? Now I remember why the fight matters in the first place. He stopped walking, turning to face me. Because of you. Because of Asher. Because even in the darkness of what we're becoming, there's still light worth protecting. Before I could respond, the air around us shimmered, and Gabriel materialized with the unsettling grace that marked all his movements. Death Mother, he said, his silver eyes bright with excitement. You need to see this. He led us to a chamber deep within our headquarters, where mirrors lined the walls, not ordinary mirrors, but surfaces that showed glimpses of other places, other times. Gabriel moved to one particular mirror, pressing his hands against its surface until images began to form. The first token has been activated, he announced. The mirror cleared, revealing a scene that made my blood freeze. We were looking through someone's eyes, presumably one of the Black Moon wolves who had picked up Asher's cursed token. The view showed the interior of what looked like a sick room, where an elderly man lay unconscious in a massive bed. Connor Cain, Damon breathed. Cain's father. The former alpha looked terrible, gaunt and pale, his breathing labored and uneven. But more disturbing was the figure moving around his bedside with practiced efficiency. Celine Ravencrest, carefully measuring drops of something into a glass of water. Poison, I realized. Wolfsbane extract, by the smell, Gabriel confirmed. Carefully dosed to avoid immediate lethality, but steady enough to ensure gradual organ failure. We watched in horrified fascination as Celine helped the unconscious man drink the tainted water, her beautiful face serene with concentration. When she was finished, she leaned down to whisper something in his ear, words we couldn't hear but could guess at from her expression. She's been doing this for weeks, I said, pieces falling into place. That's why Kane's been so focused on hunting me. He thinks his father is dying naturally, doesn't realize his new mate is slowly murdering the old alpha to secure his position. More than that, Damon said grimly. Connor Kane is the only thing standing between the pack and complete chaos. He may be a bastard, but he's a competent bastard. With him gone, Kane will inherit a situation he's completely unprepared to handle. Which serves our purposes perfectly, Gabriel added with predatory satisfaction. A weak alpha, a murderous Luna, and a pack that doesn't realize how compromised their leadership has become. We have to warn them, I said immediately. Both men stared at me as if I'd suggested setting myself on fire. Warn them? Gabriel repeated. Death Mother, these are the same people who tried to kill you and your infant son. Who threw stones at you while you bled in the snow. I know what they did. My voice carried more authority than I'd intended, and the mirrors around us began to resonate with harmonic frequencies. But Connor Kane isn't responsible for that. And even if he was, no one deserves to be murdered by poison in their sleep. Your compassion is admirable, Damon said carefully, but potentially foolish. Connor Kane participated in the murder of my family. He helped cover up the truth about what happened 20 years ago. Then he deserves to face justice for those crimes. Real justice, not assassination by his son's ambitious mate. Gabriel laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. And how exactly do you propose to warn him? Walk up to the Black Moon pack house and announce that you've been spying on them? No, I said slowly, an idea beginning to form. We use what Celine has given us. We turn her own crime into a weapon. Before either of them could ask what I meant, new images flickered in the mirror. The perspective had shifted, we were now seeing through different eyes, someone moving through what looked like the packhouse's main corridor. Asher, I breathed. My son's mission was proceeding exactly as planned. Through the magical connection, I could feel his calm confidence as he played the part of a lost, frightened pup. His disguise was perfect, even I might not have recognized him if not for the familiar intelligence in his movements. There, Gabriel pointed to the mirror. He's found the alpha. Kane stood in what looked like his father's study, surrounded by maps and tactical reports. He looked older than when I'd last seen him, worn down by stress and responsibility. When Asher appeared in the doorway, Kane's expression softened with what might have been genuine compassion. Hello there, Kane said gently. Are you lost, little one? Yes, sir, Asher replied, his voice pitched perfectly for his apparent age. I've been walking for days. My pack was attacked by something terrible. I think I'm the only one left. The lie was delivered with devastating innocence, and I watched Kane's face crumple with sympathy. Whatever else he was, he genuinely cared about protecting pack children. You're safe now, Kane promised, kneeling to Asher's eye level. What's your name? David, Asher said without hesitation. David Morgan. Well, David, you're welcome to stay with us as long as you need. The Black Moon pack protects its own. Even orphans? Asher asked with perfectly calculated vulnerability. Especially orphans. Kane's voice was firm with conviction. No child should have to face the world alone. I felt tears prick at my eyes, remembering the man Kane had been before his father's ambitions and Celine's manipulation had twisted him into someone cruel. There was still goodness in him, still the potential for redemption. Which made what I was about to do feel like both justice and tragedy. Gabriel, I said quietly. Can you modify the tokens? Make them transmit messages as well as receive them? Certainly. But why would you want to? He stopped, understanding dawning in his silver eyes. You're going to tell him about Celine. Not directly. But if someone were to have a prophetic dream, a vision warning of poison and betrayal. I let the implications hang in the air. Psychological warfare, Damon said with reluctant admiration. Turns Celine's own crime into paranoia and suspicion within their ranks. More than that. It gives Kane a chance to choose who he wants to be, the man who protects innocence, or the puppet dancing to his mate's murderous tune. In the mirror, Asher was being led through the pack house by Kane himself, introduced to pack members as their newest refugee. With each person they met, Asher discreetly left behind one of Gabriel's curse tokens, a touch here, a dropped toy there, spreading our surveillance network throughout the Black Moon hierarchy. Remarkable, Gabriel murmured. The boy's natural talent for espionage is extraordinary. He gets it from his mother, Damon said dryly. But I was focused on the images flowing through our mirrors, watching as my son gathered intelligence with the skill of someone decades older. Through his eyes, I could see the signs of a pack under strain, warriors moving with the nervous energy of soldiers expecting attack, leaders who jumped at shadows, an atmosphere of barely controlled paranoia. They're afraid, I realized. Good, Gabriel said with satisfaction. Fear makes people sloppy, prone to mistakes we can exploit. It also makes them dangerous, Damon warned. Scared animals bite harder than confident ones. As if to prove his point, the perspective in the mirror suddenly shifted as Asher was approached by a familiar figure, Celine herself, her green eyes bright with suspicion as she studied the new arrival. And who might this be? She asked, her voice honey-sweet with underlying threat. David Morgan, Kane said proudly. A survivor from the Moonridge pack attack. He'll be staying with us. Will he? Celine moved closer to Asher, and through the magical connection I could feel my son's careful stillness as her enhanced senses analyzed everything about him. How interesting. Is there a problem? Kane asked, clearly not understanding his mate's sudden tension. Oh, no problem at all, Celine said, though her smile had turned predatory. I just find it fascinating how many orphans have been showing up lately. Almost as if someone were deliberately placing them. My heart stopped. She suspected something, though she clearly didn't understand what. Children seek safety where they can find it, Kane said dismissively. Especially after what's been happening in the outer territories. Yes, Celine agreed, her eyes never leaving Asher's disguised face. The outer territories have been so eventful lately. Almost as if something new and dangerous has awakened in the wilderness. The threat in her words was unmistakable, and through our connection I felt Asher's response, not fear, but a cold amusement that was terrifying in someone who appeared to be a small child. I wouldn't know about that, ma'am, he said with perfect innocence. I've just been trying to find somewhere safe. Of course you have, dear. Celine's smile widened, showing teeth that seemed just a little too sharp. We'll have to make sure you feel very welcome here. The way she said, welcome, made my blood freeze. Whatever suspicions she harbored, Celine clearly intended to investigate them thoroughly. That's enough surveillance for today, I said urgently. Pull him out. Not yet, Asher's voice came clearly through the magical connection, though his lips didn't move in the mirror. I haven't finished distributing the tokens. And I think our poisonous Luna is about to do something very interesting. Before any of us could protest, Celine turned away from Kane and Asher, moving toward a door that led deeper into the pack house. Through our magical connection, I could feel Asher's decision to follow her, a choice that sent terror flooding through my system. Asher, no, I whispered, but it was too late. My son was already moving, his supernatural abilities allowing him to trail Celine without being detected. The mirror's perspective shifted as he followed her through corridors I recognized from my own time in the pack house, until they reached a room I'd never seen before. Celine's private laboratory. The chamber was filled with alchemical equipment, ingredient jars, and detailed notes written in her precise handwriting. But what drew the eye were the test subjects, small animals in various stages of what looked like magical experimentation, their forms twisted by substances I couldn't identify. My God, Damon breathed. She's not just poisoning Connor. She's developing something else entirely. Celine moved to a cabinet filled with vials of different colored liquids, selecting one that glowed with sickly green light. As she worked, she spoke to herself in the way people do when they think they're completely alone. Soon, she murmured, measuring drops of the glowing substance into a larger container. Just a few more days until the old fool dies, and then Kane will be completely under my control. The perfect alpha for my perfect pack. She paused, her expression growing dreamy with anticipation. And once I've dealt with that troublesome Omega and her abomination of a child, nothing will stand in the way of what I'm building. The Black Moon Pack will become the foundation of a new supernatural order, with me as its guiding intelligence. Megalomaniac, Gabriel said with professional appreciation. I do admire ambition, even when it's appallingly misguided. But I was focused on the vials in Celine's collection, particularly one that pulsed with the same dark energy I'd learned to associate with death magic. She's been stealing power, I realized. From the creatures she's experimenting on, from Connor Kane, probably from anyone else she can manage without being caught. A wannabe moon wraith, Damon said grimly. She's trying to artificially replicate your abilities. Which means she's more dangerous than we thought, I said. And Asher needs to get out of there. Now. But as if she'd heard my words, Celine suddenly went very still. Her head turned toward the door where Asher was hidden, and her eyes began to glow with stolen power. I know you're there, she said softly. I can smell you, little spy. Why don't you come out and introduce yourself properly? In the mirror, I watched my son weigh his options with the calculating precision of someone far older than his apparent years. When he finally stepped into view, his disguise had changed, not dramatically, but enough to suggest uncertainty about his own appearance. I got lost, he said, letting his voice tremble with apparent fear. I was looking for the bathroom and took a wrong turn. Were you? Celine moved closer, her stolen power making the air around her shimmer with heat. How unfortunate. Because this room is strictly off-limits to pack members. Even adorable little orphans. I'm sorry, Asher said, backing toward the door. I'll just go back to. Oh, I don't think so. Celine's hand shot out, grasping Asher's wrist with superhuman speed. I think you and I need to have a very serious conversation about who you really are. The moment her enhanced senses made contact with my son's disguised form, her expression changed completely. The artificial sweetness vanished, replaced by recognition and fury that made her beautiful features twist into something monstrous. You, she whispered. You're hers, aren't you? The Omega's little bastard. I don't know what you're talking about, Asher said, but his voice had gone flat and dangerous. Don't lie to me, Celine snarled. I can smell her on you, can sense the corruption she's passed to your blood. You're Lyra's abomination, sent here to spy on us. And if I am? The question was delivered with such casual menace that even through the magical connection, I felt a chill of apprehension. This was not the frightened child Celine thought she was threatening. If you are, Celine said with vicious satisfaction, then you're exactly the leverage I need to bring your mother to heel. She began to channel power, not her own natural abilities, but the stolen death magic she'd been accumulating. Dark energy swirled around her hand, preparing to strike at my son with forces that should have been fatal. They would have been fatal, to a normal child. Asher smiled. Leverage, he repeated thoughtfully. I don't think you understand how this works. The stolen death magic Celine had been channeling suddenly reversed course, flowing away from her and into my son like water finding its level. Her eyes widened with shock and terror as she realized what was happening. Impossible, she breathed. You've been playing with forces you don't understand, Asher said gently. Death magic isn't something you can steal and hoard like gold coins. It belongs to those born to wield it, and it always returns to its rightful masters. The energy transfer accelerated, and Celine began to age rapidly as her stolen power was stripped away. Her perfect skin wrinkled, her lustrous hair went gray, her enhanced strength failed. Stop, she gasped. Please, I didn't know. You didn't know because you never bothered to learn, Asher said with the patience of someone explaining basic facts to a child. You saw power and decided to take it, never wondering why it was abandoned in the first place. I can help you, Celine pleaded desperately. I can give you information about the council, about Kane's plans. I already have all the information I need. Asher released her wrist, leaving her collapsed on the laboratory floor. But thank you for the demonstration. It will be useful when I explain to Mother why some threats require permanent solutions. He turned to leave, then paused as if remembering something important. "Oh, and Celine? The next time you try to poison someone, you might want to make sure their son isn't developing prophetic dreams. Kane's going to have quite the revelation about your little hobby." With that parting shot, my son walked calmly out of the laboratory, leaving behind a woman whose stolen power had been completely stripped away and whose darkest secret was about to be exposed. "Well," Gabriel said into the stunned silence that followed. "I believe we can safely say the mission was a success." But I wasn't thinking about success or failure. I was thinking about the casual way my son had dismantled a threat, the complete lack of mercy he'd shown to someone who had tried to harm him. Asher was growing stronger by the day, more capable, more dangerous. But he was also growing colder, more willing to solve problems with absolute solutions rather than exploring alternatives. He was becoming exactly what our enemies claimed he was, a monster. The question was whether I could guide him back toward humanity, or if the path he was walking would eventually consume everything good in him. The hunt was far from over. But now I wasn't just worried about external enemies. I was starting to worry about what my son might become if left unchecked. And that terrified me more than anything Kane or the Council could possibly threaten. Chapter 7. The harvest moon hung full and blood-red over the Black Moon territory, casting everything in shades of crimson and shadow that seemed to pulse with ancient power. From my vantage point in the forest surrounding the pack's main compound, I could hear the sounds of celebration, music, laughter, the kind of joy that came from community and tradition. It made what I was about to do feel both necessary and monstrous. "Are you certain about this approach?" Damon asked for the third time, his silver eyes reflecting concern as he watched me apply the final touches to my disguise. "Walking directly into their stronghold during their most sacred festival, it's incredibly dangerous." "Everything we do now is dangerous," I replied, checking my reflection in Gabriel's enchanted mirror. The woman looking back at me was beautiful in a way I'd never been, tall and elegant, with flowing auburn hair and eyes the color of forest shadows. My wraith powers had allowed me to craft an entirely new identity, one that would appeal to Kane's protective instincts while hiding my true nature until the moment I chose to reveal it. "The timing is perfect," Gabriel added, his form flickering slightly as he prepared to transport me to the pack's borders. "The harvest moon amplifies all supernatural abilities, including yours. And with the entire pack gathered in one place, I can expose Celine's crimes before the entire community," I finished. "Force Kane to confront the truth about what his precious mate has been doing." "And then?" Asher asked from where he sat cross-legged on the ground, his appearance now that of a boy perhaps 8 years old. The rapid aging had continued over the past week, along with an emotional distance that worried me more than any physical threat. "What happens after you've destroyed their golden princess?" The casual way he spoke of destruction sent a chill through me. "Then we see if Kane is still capable of making the right choices. And if he's not, then we end this once and for all." Asher smiled, and there was something in that expression that reminded me uncomfortably of the ancient beings who ruled the Shadowlands, beautiful, terrible, and utterly without mercy. "I'll be watching from the treeline," he said. "Ready to assist if things go badly." "No." The command came out sharper than I'd intended. "You stay here with Damon and Gabriel. This is reconnaissance and psychological warfare, not a battle." "Yet," Asher corrected gently. "Not a battle yet." An hour later, I stood at the edge of the Black Moon Pack's territory, my heart racing despite the cool confidence my wraith powers provided. The festival was in full swing, hundreds of wolves in both human and lupin form moving through a celebration that had remained unchanged for generations. Paper lanterns strung between the trees cast warm light over food stalls and game booths, while a raised platform in the center of the compound hosted musicians whose melodies carried the wild, haunting themes of ancient pack songs. Children ran between the adults, their laughter bright as silver bells, while their parents watched with the relaxed vigilance of people who felt truly safe. It should have been beautiful. It would have been beautiful, if not for the corruption at its heart. I moved through the crowd with practiced ease, my disguise drawing appreciative glances from unmated males and curious looks from the females. No one questioned my presence. During the harvest moon, pack boundaries relaxed and visitors from allied territories were common. Luna Cassandra Blackwood, I told anyone who asked, claiming membership in a pack that existed 3 states away. I'm seeking new alliances for my people. The lie flowed smoothly, backed by wraith magic that made it feel true even to supernatural senses. Within minutes, I was being introduced to pack leaders, offered food and drink, welcomed with the hospitality that defined werewolf culture at its best. If only they knew what I really was. Kane stood on the central platform, dressed in formal alpha regalia that emphasized both his authority and his devastating good looks. Beside him, Celine glowed in a gown of gold silk that caught the lantern light like captured sunlight. They looked perfect together, the powerful Alpha and his beautiful Luna, presiding over their peaceful, prosperous pack. But I could see what others couldn't. The way Celine's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. The careful way she positioned herself to avoid direct contact with pack members whose enhanced senses might detect the lingering traces of stolen magic. The nervous energy that radiated from her despite her serene expression. She knew something was wrong. Knew that her carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. Good. Beautiful ceremony, I commented to Beta Marcus, who had been assigned to escort me through the festivities. Your Alpha and Luna seem very devoted to each other. They are, Marcus agreed, though I caught something strained in his voice. Though Kane has been troubled lately. Strange dreams, he says. Visions of betrayal and poison. Perfect. Asher's modifications to the surveillance tokens were working exactly as planned, feeding Kane prophetic dreams that would prepare him for what was coming. Dreams can be powerful warnings, I said carefully. Especially during times like these, when old enemies are stirring. Old enemies? Marcus's attention sharpened. What have you heard? Whispers, mostly. Talk of rogue wolves with abilities that shouldn't exist. Death magic awakening in the deep forests. I let my gaze drift toward the platform where Kane and Celine stood. The kind of corruption that spreads through packs from within, poisoning everything it touches. Marcus followed my gaze, and I saw understanding begin to dawn in his eyes. You think? I think, I said softly, that not all threats come from outside pack boundaries. Sometimes the greatest danger is the one that shares your bed. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion near the platform drew our attention. Kane had gone very still, his enhanced senses focused on something beyond the crowd. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the festival grounds. Everyone remain calm, he said, his alpha authority cutting through the music and laughter. We have an uninvited guest. The crowd began to murmur nervously, heads turning as they searched for the threat their alpha had detected. But Kane's golden eyes were fixed directly on me, and I realized with a chill that my disguise hadn't been as perfect as I'd thought. You, he said, pointing in my direction. Luna Cassandra Blackwood of the Northern Territories. Would you care to explain what you're really doing here? The crowd parted around me like water, leaving me exposed in a circle of suspicious faces. But instead of fear, I felt a surge of anticipation. This was it, the moment when pretense ended and truth began. How did you know? I asked, letting my voice carry clearly across the suddenly silent festival. Your scent, Kane said, his expression grim. It's familiar, but wrong. Like someone I knew once, but changed. Corrupted. Corrupted? I laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. That's rich, coming from someone whose mate has been slowly murdering his father with wolfsbane extract. The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Gasps and shocked exclamations rippled through the assembled wolves, while on the platform, Celine went white as fresh snow. That's impossible, Kane said, but his voice lacked conviction. Celine would never. Wouldn't she? I began walking toward the platform, my wraith powers making each step echo with unnatural resonance. Tell me, Kane, how long has your father been ill? How long has he been growing weaker while your beloved mate has been so attentive to his care? You're lying, Celine spoke for the first time, her voice high and strained. Father Connor is suffering from a wasting disease. I've been trying to help him. Help him die, I corrected. 3 drops of concentrated wolfsbane in his evening water, every night for the past 6 weeks. Just enough to shut down his organs slowly, to make it look like natural aging. Prove it, Cain demanded, but I could see the doubt beginning to creep into his expression. The prophetic dreams Asher had planted were making him receptive to possibilities he would normally dismiss. Gladly. I reached into the pouch at my side and withdrew one of the surveillance tokens Asher had planted throughout the pack house. With a word of power, I activated its stored memories, projecting them into the air above the crowd like a supernatural movie screen. The assembled wolves watched in horrified silence as images played out before them. Celine in her laboratory, mixing poisons. Celine standing over Connor Kane's unconscious form, forcing tainted water down his throat. Celine speaking to herself about her plans for absolute control over the pack. No, Celine whispered, her beautiful face crumpling with despair. That's not, those images are fabricated, created by dark magic to make me look guilty. Are they? I gestured, and the projection shifted to show Celine's encounter with Asher in her laboratory. The crowd watched as she aged rapidly, her stolen power being stripped away, her true nature revealed. She's been using death magic, Beta Marcus said, his voice filled with disgust. Stealing power from the creatures she experiments on, from Alpha Connor himself. Murderer, someone shouted from the crowd. Poisoner. She has to be executed, another voice called. It's pack law. The crowd began to surge toward the platform, their festival mood transformed into mob fury in the space of heartbeats. Celine shrank back against Cain, her eyes wide with terror as she realized how completely her world had collapsed. Please, she begged, grasping Cain's arm. You know me, you love me. I did this for us, for our future together. Your father was weak, holding the pack back. You murdered my father, Cain said quietly, and the pain in his voice was devastating to hear. You made me complicit in patricide by keeping me ignorant of your crimes. I saved you from having to make the hard choice yourself, Celine protested desperately. You would have had to challenge him eventually, and you're too honorable to do what needed to be done. What needed to be done, Cain repeated, his voice growing stronger, was to respect the man who raised me, who taught me everything I know about leadership and honor. Not poison him like a coward. The crowd's fury was reaching dangerous levels, and I could see several pack members shifting into wolf form, preparing to tear Celine apart. It would have been justice of a sort, but not the kind that would serve my purposes. Enough, I said, my voice carrying supernatural authority that silenced even the most enraged wolves. Before you decide her fate, perhaps you should know who's been revealing these truths to you. I let my disguise fall away like discarded clothing, revealing my true appearance to the shocked crowd. Gasps and cries of recognition rippled through the assembled pack as they realized who had been walking among them. Lyra Ashworth, Cain breathed. The Omega who? The Omega you rejected, I finished. The Omega you left to die in the snow with her newborn son. The Omega who survived to become something you never imagined possible. The crowd began to back away from me, their supernatural senses finally recognizing the death magic that clung to my presence like a second skin. But Cain held his ground, his golden eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that spoke of old pain and older regrets. How? He asked simply. I made a bargain, I said. With powers you've forgotten, spirits your people abandoned when you decided that strength came from dominance rather than connection. They awakened what was always sleeping in my bloodline. And our son? The question was barely a whisper, but it carried across the silent festival like a shout. I could see the hope and terror warring in Cain's expression, hope that Asher had survived, terror of what he might have become. Our son is extraordinary, I said softly. More powerful than either of us ever imagined possible. Strong enough to strip away stolen magic with a touch, wise enough to see through deception and illusion, capable enough to walk among his enemies without being detected. Where is he? Watching, I said. Waiting to see what kind of man his father chooses to be when faced with the consequences of his choices. Cain flinched as if I'd struck him. Lyra, you have to understand. Understand what? That you threw away our bond for a woman who's been murdering your family? That you valued pack politics more than the life of your own child? No, Cain said firmly. That I did what I thought I had to do to protect everyone. Protect them from what? Cain was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant with memory. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. 3 seers came to me the night before our mating ceremony, he said. Ancient wolves with the gift of prophecy, sent by powers I didn't understand. They showed me visions of what would happen if I completed the bond with you. What visions? Our son, Cain said quietly. But not as a normal child. As something else, something that would grow too powerful too quickly. They showed me Pax burning, reality itself bending around his will, supernatural wars that would consume everything we'd built. The crowd listened in stunned silence as Cain continued, his confession ripping open wounds that had never properly healed. They told me he would be the destroyer of the old ways, the end of pack hierarchy and supernatural order. That his very existence would destabilize the balance between our world and the human one. Cain's voice broke slightly. They said the only way to prevent it was to break the bond before it could fully form, to deny him the stability he would need to reach his full potential. So you rejected us, I said, pieces of a horrible puzzle falling into place. You destroyed our family to prevent a prophecy. I thought I was saving everyone, Cain said desperately. I thought if I could keep him from awakening his full abilities, if I could deny him the strength that comes from parental bonds and pack belonging, the visions wouldn't come to pass. And instead, you created exactly the conditions that would make them inevitable, I said with bitter understanding. You made him an outcast, gave him every reason to resent the supernatural world and its arbitrary rules. From the forest surrounding the festival, I heard it, a sound that made every wolf present freeze with instinctive terror. Not a howl, not a roar, but something that combined both into an expression of power that had no business existing in any mortal throat. Asher had heard Cain's confession. And he was no longer content to remain hidden. The trees at the edge of the compound began to bend and twist as my son approached, reality warping around him like heat shimmer. When he finally stepped into the lantern light, the assembled pack saw what Cain's rejection had created. An 8-year-old boy with silver blue eyes that held the weight of eternity, whose very presence made the air itself seem to thicken with possibility. Power radiated from him in waves that made the strongest alphas take involuntary steps backward. Hello, Father, Asher said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond the physical. Thank you for explaining why you abandoned us. It makes what I'm about to do so much easier to justify. Asher, I said urgently, recognizing the dangerous calm in his expression. Remember what we discussed about mercy, about being better than our enemies. Oh, I remember, my son said with a smile that was beautiful and terrible. But I also remember being born into snow and rejection, remember my first breaths being taken while my mother bled from my father's claws. I remember being hunted and despised for the crime of existing. The festival decorations began to wither and die as Asher's power reached out like invisible fingers, touching everything around him. Flowers blackened, lanterns flickered and failed, the very joy that had filled the air moments before was replaced by something that felt like the end of the world. The seers were right, Asher continued conversationally. I am the destroyer of the old ways. I am the end of arbitrary hierarchies and cruel traditions. I am what comes when the innocent are cast out and the corrupt are allowed to flourish. You don't have to be, Cain said desperately, stepping forward despite the waves of power radiating from his son. You can choose to be something else, something better. Can I? Asher tilted his head with genuine curiosity. Because from where I stand, the world you've built is one where poison is rewarded with golden crowns, where children are abandoned to protect prophecies, where power is used to crush rather than protect. Why should I preserve any of that? Because there are good people here, I said, moving to stand between my son and the terrified crowd. Because destroying everything won't fix what was broken, it will just create new suffering. Will it? Asher's eyes found mine, and for a moment I saw past his supernatural power to the hurt child underneath. Or will it finally give us the justice we were denied? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I realized that this moment would define not just our future, but the future of every supernatural being on the continent. My son stood poised to remake the world according to his vision of justice, and the only thing standing between order and chaos was my ability to reach the humanity I'd raised him to value. Cain's prophecy was coming true, but not in the way anyone had expected. The destroyer of the old ways wasn't going to be a monster. He was going to be a child who had suffered too much injustice to believe in redemption anymore. And the most terrifying part was that I was no longer certain he was wrong. "Choose, Mother," Asher said softly, his power building to levels that made reality itself groan under the strain. "Do we show them mercy they never showed us? Or do we finally teach the world what happens when the innocent are cast out and the corrupt are allowed to rule?" The assembled pack waited in terrified silence for my answer, knowing that their fate, and perhaps the fate of every supernatural being, hung in the balance. The old world was ending. The question was what would rise from its ashes. Chapter 8. The blood moon began to darken just as Asher's question hung in the air between us, the lunar eclipse casting everything in shades of deep crimson that made the festival lantern seem pale and sickly. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. The cosmic alignment was responding to the power my son radiated, reality itself holding its breath for my answer. "Choose, Mother," Asher repeated, his child's voice carrying harmonics that made the very stones of the packhouse resonate. "Justice or mercy? The old world or something new?" But before I could respond, the forest around us erupted into chaos. They came from all directions at once, my pack of outcasts and monsters, answering a call I hadn't consciously sent but that my power had apparently issued anyway. Gabriel emerged from shadow itself, his ice-pale form blazing with stolen death magic. Anna materialized with time bending around her like heat shimmer, while the water woman flowed between the trees with liquid grace that made normal movement look clumsy by comparison. Behind them came dozens of others, supernatural beings who had been cast out, hunted, abandoned by the very packs that now cowered before their fury. They moved with the coordinated precision of wolves who had learned to fight as one, but their abilities went far beyond anything normal pack dynamics could accommodate. "No," I said urgently, power flaring around me as I tried to call them back. "I didn't summon you." "You didn't need to," Gabriel called back, his voice carrying clearly over the sounds of approaching battle. "The eclipse amplifies everything, Death Mother. Your emotional state, your son's power, the connections between us all. We felt your pain and came to answer it." The Black Moon wolves were already shifting into defensive positions, their festival clothes shredding as they took lupin form. But even enhanced by council magic, they were badly outnumbered and completely outclassed. My outcasts had spent years learning to survive in the Shadowlands, adapting to powers that defied natural law. This wouldn't be a battle. It would be a massacre. "Stop," Cain commanded, his alpha authority cutting through the chaos. "Stand down, all of you. This is sacred ground, neutral territory during the Harvest Moon Festival." "Sacred ground?" Gabriel laughed, the sound sharp as breaking ice. "Tell that to the Omega who bled here while your pack threw stones at her newborn child. Tell that to every supernatural being who's been hunted and killed for the crime of being different." That wasn't. Cain started to protest, but Gabriel was already moving. Ice erupted from the ground in razor-sharp spikes, forcing the Black Moon wolves to scatter. Anna's time magic began to accelerate some of the attackers while slowing others, creating pockets of confused chronology that made coordinated defense impossible. "Protect the civilians," Cain shouted to his warriors. "Get the children and elders to safety." I watched him organize the defense with practiced efficiency, putting himself between the attackers and the most vulnerable pack members. Despite everything that had happened between us, he was still trying to minimize casualties, still thinking like a protector rather than a conqueror. It made what I had to do both easier and harder. "Enough," I said, my voice carrying death magic that made every supernatural being present freeze in place. "This isn't why we came here. Isn't it?" Asher asked, his power building to levels that made the air itself seem to thicken. "They rejected us, hunted us, tried to destroy us. Why shouldn't we return the favor?" "Because we're better than they are," I said firmly. "Because mercy is what separates civilization from chaos." "Is it?" My son's eyes found Cain across the battlefield. "Tell me, Father, if our positions were reversed, if you had the power to end this conflict permanently, would you show us mercy? Cain was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes moving between the supernatural forces arrayed against his pack and the son he'd never truly known. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute honesty. I don't know, he admitted. I'd like to think I would, but I don't know. At least you're honest, Asher said with something that might have been respect. More honest than the seers who convinced you to abandon us. The seers, Celine spoke for the first time since her crimes had been exposed, her voice high with desperate calculation. Yes, the seers who came to Cain with their prophecies and their warnings. Something in her tone made me turn toward her sharply. She was standing at the edge of the platform, no longer cowering but watching the supernatural battle with eyes that held far too much intelligence and anticipation. What about the seers, Celine? I asked, power stirring in response to my suspicion. Didn't you ever wonder, she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, how convenient it was that they appeared exactly when they did. How perfectly their prophecy served to break the one bond that might have prevented all this chaos. Cain's head snapped toward his mate, understanding beginning to dawn in his expression. What are you saying? I'm saying, Celine said with a smile that was sharp as a blade, that some prophecies are manufactured rather than received. That sometimes the future needs a little guidance to unfold properly. The admission hit me like a physical blow. You created the prophecy. I hired the seers, Celine corrected. Fed them enough information about bloodline histories and power manifestations to craft a believable vision. It wasn't difficult. Cain wanted to believe he was protecting everyone, and people always see what they're prepared to see. You manipulated everything, Cain said, his voice hollow with betrayal. The rejection, the exile, Asher's development, all of it was orchestrated. All of it was necessary, Celine said, power beginning to flow around her, not the stolen death magic I'd stripped away, but something else entirely. Something older and more dangerous. The Ravencrest family has been planning this consolidation for 3 generations. We needed the Black Moon Pack weakened, divided, ready to accept new leadership. New leadership? I repeated. Mine, Celine said simply. With Cain as my puppet alpha and you as a convenient enemy to unite the packs against. Your son's power was just an unexpected bonus. Imagine what the council would pay for a child who could reshape reality itself. As she spoke, her appearance began to change. The beautiful young woman was replaced by something far older, far more dangerous. Her skin took on a translucent quality that revealed veins of silver light beneath, while her eyes became pools of liquid starlight that hurt to look at directly. Sorceress, Gabriel breathed. Not just council enhancement, she's a true sorceress. 3rd generation, Celine said with pride. My grandmother was among the first to learn how to bind supernatural abilities to human will. My mother perfected the techniques of power theft and manipulation. And I learned how to orchestrate entire bloodline conflicts for profit. The revelation sent shock waves through both sides of the conflict. Sorceresses were myths, legends from the Dark Ages when humans had first learned to steal and use supernatural abilities. If they truly existed, if they'd been manipulating pack politics for generations. The missing scouts, Cain said suddenly. The attacks on border territories, the supernatural disturbances, all of it was you. All of it was business, Celine corrected. Create chaos, sell solutions. Manufacture conflicts, then profit from the cleanup. The Ravencrest fortune wasn't built on legitimate supernatural trades, it was built on the systematic exploitation of every supernatural community we could reach. And now? I asked, though I thought I already knew the answer. Now I collect my final payment, Celine said, power building around her like visible heat. The council has offered me more wealth than you can imagine for a breeding pair of moon wraiths. You and your son will make excellent test subjects. The sorceress magic she unleashed was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. Where death magic felt cold and inevitable, this was hot and chaotic, reality-warping power that had been stolen from dozens of different supernatural sources and cobbled together into something that shouldn't exist. Asher, run, I shouted, throwing up barriers of death magic to block her attack. But my son didn't run. Instead, he stepped forward, his young face serene with the kind of calm that preceded terrible violence. "No more running," he said quietly. "No more hiding what we are." The power that erupted from him made the lunar eclipse seem like a flickering candle. Reality didn't just bend, it reshattered completely, reforming around my sons will like clay in the hands of a master sculptor. But instead of destruction, instead of the apocalyptic violence everyone expected, Asher did something unprecedented. He began to heal. The Black Moon wolves who had been injured in the initial chaos found their wounds closing. The festival decorations that had withered under his earlier power burst back into vibrant life. Even the fear and hatred that had poisoned the air between the two sides began to dissipate, replaced by something that felt like understanding. "You were wrong," Asher said to Celine, his voice carrying across the supernatural battlefield with perfect clarity. "All of you were wrong about what I am." "You're a destroyer," Celine snarled, her stolen power faltering against the wall of pure possibility my son had erected around himself. "The prophecies were clear." "The prophecies were lies," Asher corrected gently. "Manufactured to serve your ambitions. But even if they had been real, they would have been wrong about my nature." He gestured, and Celine's sorceress magic simply stopped. Not blocked or countered, but unraveled at its most fundamental level, the stolen power returning to its original sources. "I'm not a destroyer," Asher continued, his form beginning to shimmer with light that made the blood moon above us seem pale by comparison. "I'm a balancer. I restore what's been broken, heal what's been wounded, return what's been stolen." Around the battlefield, stolen enhancements began leaving the council-modified Black Moon wolves, flowing back to their original owners or simply dissipating into the natural magic that permeated all life. Celine aged rapidly as her artificial youth was stripped away, revealing a woman whose true age was measured in centuries rather than decades. "Impossible," she whispered, her voice now cracked with age. "The Convergence bloodlines were all destroyed. The Balance Keepers died out over 1,000 years ago." "Did they?" Asher asked with innocent curiosity. "Or did they simply go into hiding, waiting for the right moment to return? Waiting for a world so damaged by theft and corruption that their gifts would be needed again?" I felt it then, the truth of what my son was saying. The ancient power that had awakened in me wasn't just death magic, it was balance magic. The ability to take life, yes, but also to give it. To restore harmony to systems that had been thrown into chaos by greed and manipulation. The moon wraiths weren't destroyers, I realized aloud. They were healers. Supernatural antibodies, activated when the balance tipped too far toward corruption. "And now the balance has been restored," Asher said with satisfaction. "The stolen power returned, the false prophecies exposed, the corrupt punished." Celine collapsed to her knees, her centuries of artificial life finally catching up with her. But instead of dying, she simply stopped. Frozen at the moment between life and death, trapped in the consequences of her own choices. "A fitting punishment," Gabriel observed. "Eternal stasis, forever aware but unable to act." "Mercy," I corrected. "She's alive, which is more than she showed her victims." Cain stood in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by his pack members who were staring in wonder at their alpha. The council enhancements had been stripped away, but instead of making them weaker, Asher's intervention had restored their natural abilities to levels they'd forgotten they possessed. "What happens now?" Cain asked, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the supernatural silence. "Now," I said, power flowing around me like visible starlight, "we rebuild. But not the old way, not with arbitrary hierarchies and cruel traditions." "What way, then?" "My way." I stepped forward, my presence making every supernatural being present feel the weight of ancient authority. "I claim the right of conquest over the Black Moon Pack. Your corruption is ended, your false leadership exposed. Bow to me, Cain Black Moon, and I'll show you what real leadership looks like." Cain was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes searching my face for something I wasn't sure he'd find. Around us, his pack waited in tense silence for his decision. "If I bow to you," he said finally, "what happens to my people? To the children and elders who had nothing to do with the crimes committed in their name?" They'll be protected, I said firmly. Fed, housed, given the security and safety they deserve. But they'll also be educated about what equality really means, what happens when power is used to protect rather than dominate. And me? You'll serve, I said simply. You'll learn what it means to be led instead of leading, to follow instead of commanding. And maybe, if you prove yourself worthy, you'll earn the right to stand beside me as an equal rather than kneeling as a subject. Cain looked at his son, at the boy who had just reshaped reality itself to heal rather than harm. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute commitment. I, Cain Black Moon, last alpha of the Black Moon Pack, do formally surrender my authority to Lyra Ashworth, rightful heir to the Moon Wraith bloodline and supreme alpha of all supernatural beings who choose to follow her. He knelt in the blood-red dirt of the festival grounds, his golden head bowed in submission. Around him, his pack members followed suit, some willingly, others with reluctance, but all recognizing the fundamental shift in power that had just occurred. Rise, I said after a moment. All of you, rise. The age of kneeling is over. From now on, we stand together. As the blood moon reached the peak of its eclipse, as my son's healing light continued to flow across the battlefield, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that night in the snow when Cain's claws had torn open my throat. Peace. Not the peace of endings, but the peace of new beginnings. The old world had indeed ended, just as Asher had predicted. But what rose from its ashes wasn't destruction. It was hope. The Ravencrest fortune would crumble as word of Celine's crimes spread throughout the supernatural world. The Council would find their artificial enhancements failing as Asher's influence reached further and further across the continent. Packs that had built their power on theft and corruption would discover that their foundations had turned to sand. But those who embraced the new way, who chose cooperation over domination, healing over harming, they would thrive under the protection of the Supreme Alpha and her impossible son. Cain rose to his feet, his eyes meeting mine with something that might have been the beginning of respect. What do you need from us? He asked. Everything, I said honestly. Your knowledge, your skills, your commitment to becoming better than you were. This isn't conquest, Cain. It's rehabilitation. And if we fail? If old habits prove too strong to break? I smiled, and let him see just enough of my power to understand what failure would mean. Then you'll discover that mercy, like everything else, has its limits. The festival continued around us, but it was different now. Instead of celebrating the old ways, the assembled supernatural beings were witnessing the birth of something new. Children who had cowered in fear were now playing together regardless of their pack affiliations. Adults who had been enemies minutes before were sharing food and stories as Asher's healing influence made old grudges seem petty and pointless. It's beautiful, Anna observed, her time magic allowing her to see the probability stream spreading out from this moment. The future is still fluid, still dangerous, but the potential for something better is stronger than I've ever seen. Good, I said, watching my son move through the crowd with the casual authority of someone born to lead. Because this is just the beginning. The blood moon began to lighten as the eclipse passed its peak, but the changes that had been wrought in its crimson light would endure. The supernatural world had a new supreme alpha, one who had chosen mercy over vengeance and healing over destruction. Whether that choice would prove wise or foolish remained to be seen. But for the first time since that night in the snow, I believed we had a real chance at building something worthy of the power we'd been given. The hunt was over. The real work was just beginning. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share and subscribe for more.